Hi, welcome back to part 2 of the Rb20det build. So in this one we're going to start off by reinstalling the oil squirters. What these are is they go into the main oil gallery and they squirt oil on the bottom of the piston to primarily help with cooling. So these are just going to thread in right here on each one of these spots. Okay, so now the oil squirters are going to be torqued down to 25 foot-pounds or about 35 Newton meters. So I'll go ahead and torque down each one of these now. Alright, so now it's time to go ahead and reinstall the crankshaft. Again, because honestly I forgot to put the assembly lube in a minute ago, so I already took it back out and now I'm putting it back in. Anyway, so this is the Itski's assembly lube. I'm a big fan of it. It's really tacky, stays in place, and a lot of engine builders that I've talked to recommend it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on each one of the bearing surfaces again. Now I'm going to go ahead and set the crankshaft back in very carefully. Again, being careful not to ding any of the bearings or ding the crankshaft with any of the sharp edges from the journals. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the assembly lube on the girdle off camera here as well. Now the crank girdle's in place and it's time to go ahead and start torquing these bolts down. I'm going to start in the middle by carefully running these down to pull the crank girdle fully into place. Then I'll go ahead and run the rest of the bolts down in the same way. Alright, now that we have the crank pulled down, it's time to go ahead and torque it down. I'm going to do this in 2 stages, starting in the middle, then working my way out in kind of a crisscross pattern. So the torque wrench already is set to 38 Newton meters from something previously, so I'll do that first, and I'll go back and do them again to the next torque. Now that I have them all torqued down to 38 Newton meters, it's time to go to the final torque, which is going to be 50 Newton meters this time. Again, I'm going to start here in the middle and work my way out towards the outside of the crankshaft. Alright, the crankshaft's in and torqued down. Still moves by hand, so that's a good sign. So now it's time to go ahead and move to the rods. Okay, now that we're done with the crank, it's time to go ahead and start measuring the rod bearing gap. So first I'm going to go ahead and cut some of this plastigauge and then put it on just like we did the crank. I find it easier to go ahead and cut the paper for the plastigauge, so you can go ahead and have the little pieces of plastigauge inside there at the length you already need. I'm going to be doing 1 and 6 together first because they're both up together and I can do them at the same time. You may notice that the rings are off the pistons. That's just to make it easier to slide it in there for me. There's really no other reason other than that. Now I'm going to go ahead and check and make sure I have the bottom cap on the right way for the rods. On this one, on number 6 here, there's a 6 on both sides, so I know that's the side that goes together. Make sure it's a lot easier if you just kind of keep track of it when you're building it as well. Be sure when you're putting the pistons in on any engine, and especially the RB that has oil squirters, you want to make sure that that notch is where the oil squirter is supposed to be. Otherwise it's going to hit it when the crank comes up, and you don't want that to happen. Now I'll go ahead and set the rod cap on. Number 1 is going to be exactly the same as number 6. I'm just going to pop this main cap off, or rod cap off, and make sure there's no lint on here that would throw off my reading. This is the notch I was talking about in the piston that gives relief for the oil squirters. Just make sure it's on the correct side. Then I'm going to go ahead and screw these down to hand tight, and they're making contact. Now it's time to go ahead and torque the rod down. First, it's going to be torqued down to 27 Newton meters. Then in the second stage, because it's a 2-stage torque process, it's going to be torqued down to 42 Newton meters. So now I'll go ahead and set my torque wrench to 42 Newton meters. Now it's time to go ahead and take these two off and check the plastic gauges. So a lot of times the rod, once you torque it down, it's going to be stuck together. So I'm going to use my dead blow here to kind of gently pop it apart. I'm going to leave the nuts on. That way my hammer has somewhere to hit that's not the threads. It's just going to take a little tap, not much at all, so just be careful with it. So now I'm going to go ahead and measure the squish mark of the plastic gauge here. Okay, so it looks like it's exactly 2 thousandths on this rod, so go ahead and move to the next one. Then I'm going to go ahead and clean the plastic gauge residue off of these bearing shells. So now I'm going to go ahead and set number 6 rod and piston aside for now, because it's ready to go until we put the rings on and reinstall the rest of it. So now I'm checking number 1 for the plastic gauge squish. It looks like it's right on 2 thousandths as well, so that's great. One thing to note, I am measuring this part in inches because that's what I know better on bearing clearances. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and move to the next set. It's going to be numbers 2 and 5. I've already turned the crank. It's going to be exactly like numbers 1 and 6. I'm going to go ahead and cut some pieces of plastic gauges and put it on the bearings. Of course, just like before, remember to make sure that the bearing surfaces are clean so you don't throw off your measurement. Again, don't forget that oil squirter. It could really cause some problems if you put one of these in the wrong way. Now I'm going to go ahead and do piston number or rod number 5, exactly like I just did number 2, 1 and 6. Just like number 1 and 6, we're going to go ahead and torque this down first to 27 Newton meters, doing one side of the rod then the other. Then I'm going to go back and torque them down to 42 Newton meters the same way. Now I'm turning it up to 42 to do the second torque set. Now that both have been fully torqued down, I can go ahead and take them back off and check the plastigauge squish for I can measure the clearance on these bearings. I'm going to loosen the nuts off just like I did on 1 and 6 so I can tap it off with my dead blow. That way I can remove the rod cap. I'm going to go ahead and measure number 2 first here. It looks like it's a smidge under 0.02 of an inch, which is fine also on this one. Now I'm measuring number 5 on the bearing cap here, and it looks like it's also right around 0.02, so that's in spec.
Get this party started. I got the music playing loud. How you like my outfit? I have to say I'm kinda proud. I got my dancing shoes on, and I'm feeling dangerous. Let's get this party started. Yeah, we gon' be adventurous. We went to the club like we always do. This girl caught my eye, said, how do you do? She said, I am not interested, thank you. Then she left the room. Bartender. I'll have the usual, give me the usual, I'll take the usual. I'll have the usual, give me the usual, another usual. Up. Nothing's wrong with me yet, but maybe this bow tie was too much. I just have to be cool, looking like I'm Clint Eastwood. Ain't the bad or ugly, my mama said that I'm the good. We went to the club like we always do. This girl caught my eye, said, how do you do? She said, I am not interested, thank you. Then she left the room. Bartender. I'll have the usual, give me the usual, I'll take the usual. I'll have the usual, give me the usual, another usual.
So it looks like all the other bearings checked out within spec as well, so we can go ahead and continue on with the build now. Alright, so it's time to go ahead and flip the engine and continue with the build. Thanks for watching, and I hope you join me in the next episode.